welcome to What's Up Ocala. I'm your host, Andrew Praber, broker of Great Expectations Realty right here in Ocala, Florida. Get some gorgeous weather out lately. And today we're actually going to be talking about sinkholes. I know some of y'all are really looking forward to getting more info on that, so we're just going to get right into it. So imagine you're here. There's been a lot of sinkholes popping up after a really big storm called Tropical Storm Debbie back in 2012. And sinkholes are those holes that suddenly appear in the ground, which can be really scary. Now, the Florida government, of course, wants to figure out why these sinkholes are happening and where they might pop up next. So they get together and ask a group called the Florida Geological Survey, or FGS, to help them out. They want to figure this out. Well, the FGS uses a special technique called weights of evidence, or W of E, to study lots of different information about the ground in Florida to see where sinkholes are more likely to happen and where they could happen next based on the data. Well, these group didn't just kind of sit at their desks and guess, or, based off the reports that came in. They actually sent out teams to explore over 3,600 places all around Florida to check for signs of sinkholes. So after spending about 3.5 years doing this, they ended up mapping over 700 sinkholes, 705 to be exact. Well, then they take all this information and they made a really cool map that shows which areas of Florida are more likely to have sinkholes. Then they divided the map into 4 sections, from places where sinkholes are less likely, such as the Everglades, very, very not likely to have a sinkhole in the Everglades, to places where they're much more likely, like Pasco County. That one's a high risk for sinkhole county. So this map can help local governments make plans to help citizens and their homes safe, keep them safe from future sinkholes. So very cool. And the cool thing is that they didn't just make like a regular paper map, of course. They made a digital version that's really detailed and it can actually integrate with other maps super easily. So this digital map is like this huge giant grid covering Florida. And each square on the grid has information about how likely it is to have a sinkhole. But it's not like they just, started tracking them like just back, right after this Tropical Storm Debbie. No, they actually began tracking sinkholes, or trying to track sinkholes, back in the 1950s. The Florida Geological Survey, or FGS, actually started something called the Florida Sinkhole Index, which was used to keep track of sinkholes for scientific reasons. So they asked, they didn't actually go out. They actually asked regular people like you and me, as well as, of course, local government agencies to just, report something if they saw something. If they saw anything that might be a sinkhole, or, some kind of hole in the ground or something like that, just go ahead and call it in. This was all before the internet, before cell phones. They did the best they could with the technology they had. So we're just going to, bless their hearts and move on. So not all of these reports, obviously, were accurate or checked by experts to make sure that they were accurate. So that's about what you got out of it. In the early 1980s, they actually moved this data to a new place called the Florida Sinkhole Research Institute, FSRI. They tried to get even more reports, but still, again, not all of them were double-checked by actual scientists or people that knew the difference between a man-made hole in the ground and a sinkhole. So eventually, in 1992, the FSRI was shut down and the FGS started handling the data all over again. So there's failed attempt, basically. But like before, most of the reports were just people who saw something and it looked like a sinkhole, but it wasn't really verified information by experts that actually knew what they were looking at. So currently, most reports come from the State Watch Office of the Department of Emergency Management. And they actually do still have a form that people can fill out if they think they've spotted a sinkhole. but then it's normally followed up with actual experts. Other reports do come from regular folks who just send in reports or call the FGS directly, especially in rural areas. Sometimes in big emergencies, like after a really big storm or a freeze, the FGS geologists, I can talk today, they go out and they actually check for sinkholes themselves. But here's the tricky part. Not everything that was reported, if it's not checked out, is actually a sinkhole. Sometimes it's actually something that's just causing the ground to sink, like, I don't know, broken pipes or buried trash. I know you can laugh, and yet I may have seen a few in-ground pools that people try to fill in with old couches and carpets. So let's not laugh too hard, okay? Your neighbors are doing these things. It's tough to say for sure if all the reports are accurate. I'm going to go with probably not, but at least some of the data is. Plus, the data tends to be more from areas where more people live, so it's not really going to give you a really good picture of where sinkholes really happen, especially in those remote and rural areas, like maybe the Ocala National Forest. And then we get to the fun of 2008. Oh boy. That was when a whole slew of people were claiming to have a sinkhole to their insurance companies because they were underwater on their mortgage. I cannot tell you the thousands of homes that have prior sinkhole reported on the county property card when in reality, there was never a sinkhole at all. So basically, because of the push for fraudulent insurance claims at that time, I mean, people were pretty desperate. There were thousands of sinkholes reported to the government in an incredibly short amount of time during the recession, which nobody knows for sure which ones are real and which ones just needed to get out of a mortgage, and nobody knows. So anyway, despite all of the changes, or maybe because of them, the FGS was asked by the Department of Emergency Management to make this map showing where sinkholes might be more likely to form in Florida. And they're going to do that with a whole lot of technology. They use these, fancy computer techniques called spatial statistic modeling. And they started with a much smaller study in a few northern counties in Florida and then expanded it statewide from there. So they started small, got the system down pat, made sure their equipment was working, and went from there. So while the data on the sinkholes hasn't been perfect, because again, it's not a perfect science, the efforts are still being made to understand and to map them better and to keep everyone safe from, unexpected holes opening up in the ground and, eating your house. So we don't want that to happen. So let's kind of talk about a little bit about what sinkholes are, where they might be, how you can spot them, all that fun stuff. So very simply put, because I am a very simple person, there are two types of sinkholes normally. So there's subsidence sinkholes and collapse sinkholes. And they're both kind of not fun surprises in the ground, but they form in very different ways and have very different risks. So first up, we're going to go over the subsidence sinkholes. These take their time forming. Picture this, sediment like dirt and rocks, they're slowly, very slowly in some cases, washed down into tiny little cracks in the ground below. So over time, this can actually create a sinkhole or maybe just a slight depression on the ground. They can take anywhere from months to millions of years to form. Okay, these are not quick, drastic things. They also come in all sizes, from itty-bitty ones that are just a few inches across to big ones that stretch for hundreds of feet. So while they don't usually put lives in danger, they can definitely cause a lot of problems for buildings and stuff over long stretches of time. If you think about how old some of the buildings here in Marion County are, yeah, you could see if it had something like that going on, even though it's years and years and years, it can still be an issue. All right, now onto the collapse sinkholes. These are the ones that you've probably seen on the news. They're the fast movers of the sinkhole world. They're also the ones that get the most media attention, and they get lots of pictures taken of them, and they're very very traumatic and very scary. And these are the ones that form when the ground suddenly caves in because there's a hollow space just underneath that can't support the weight above it. So it's kind of like the roof of a cave collapsing. That's a collapse sinkhole. And they pop out of nowhere and can keep growing for hours, days, or even months after the initial collapse. So just like the subsidence sinkholes, they come in all sizes and shapes, but here's the thing, collapse sinkholes can be really dangerous because it's so sudden. And they can cause serious damage to buildings and unfortunately put lives at risk too, because, you know, what if it opens up on a road? You're driving along, there was a road, now there's not. Not good, not good. So when it comes to the size and the shape of these sinkholes, it really depends on a bunch of stuff underground, like how deep and how wide the gap in the rock or the sediment is, and how strong the ground above it is. So how much water is around, what kind of stuff is on top of it. I mean, there's a lot of stuff going on. If there's a huge, big, massive gap down there, you might get a big sinkhole on the surface. And if it's a smaller gap, you're probably just going to end up with a smaller sinkhole. That's just how it works. It's just trying to fill the gap. The type of sinkhole that's formed also depends on what's sitting on top of the rock. Most of Florida, it's got layers of sediment covering the rock, so that plays a really big role in how sinkholes are formed. We, of course, have so much lime rock here. That's really kind of the issue. So if you ever want to actually visit a sinkhole and actually see it from the inside out, I know it sounds terrifying, right? But you could actually go over to Williston and go swimming in one. This is a place you may have heard of. It's called Devil's Den. I've been there multiple times. In fact, I was just there with my family a few weeks back, and it is amazing. If you've never heard of it, basically imagine a river flowing real peaceful like beneath the earth's surface, and then it's completely hidden from view. Nobody even knows it's there. And now picture the roof of this underground river completely collapsing. And now you can see the river from above ground. And it's, you know, revealing the water out to that open air above. That's exactly what happened at Devil's Den. And it's forming what we call as a karst window, K-A-R-S-T, in case you're curious, you want to go Google it. Well, the Devil's Den is privately owned, and it's actually a hub for scuba diving training and snorkeling. We do the snorkeling. I love that. And it's just like water in any of Central Florida's, you know, natural artesian springs. The water is crystal clear and stays at a slightly chilly 72 degrees all year round. So back in the day, getting into Devil's Den was really quite the adventure. Any of the visitors, they had to squeeze through this really small solution sinkhole that was kind of to the side just to get to the water. But back in the 1990s, they actually widened the opening a little, still pretty tight, to make it a little more accessible for everyone. But it's single file going in. And if you're trying to go out while someone else is coming up, especially if they have scuba equipment, one of you is going to have to wait because there is no room for passing. Anyway, once you're inside, you're going to be completely surrounded by these beautiful rock walls and just this gorgeous cave. And the light coming in from above, it's just gorgeous. And then there's all this water that's kind of, I don't know, the whole shape is kind of like an inverted mushroom. That's what they refer to it as. It's kind of just this big, you know, big amount of water underneath. And anyway, the water, again, crystal clear. And there's some pretty good sized fish and turtles and stuff in there too. It's not like it's just water. It's a river. So if you're feeling really adventurous, you can go cave scuba diving and explore the 4 underwater passages, some of which contain some really fascinating remains and artifacts that go back to the time when there were like saber-toothed cats and mastodons and stuff like that. I wouldn't know. I go snorkeling in that area. Cave diving is not my thing. And I actually stay where the sun is shining down. I am way too chicken to go cave diving. I've heard things. I don't care what the artifacts are over there. I don't need to see them. So while sinkholes might seem like they just kind of pop up randomly, there's actually a lot going on underneath that actually determines how and when they will appear and how long they last. And it's actually really cool to be able to see it firsthand from underneath in a place like the Devil's Den. All right, so what does this all have to do with real estate? Well, I have been asked so many times, is it safe to buy a house with a prior sinkhole that's been fixed? Oh boy, I don't know. That's the truth. I've often seen people advertise houses that have had sinkhole issues in the past and they call it remediated. Sometimes they'll even say things like, well, now that this home has been remediated and it's all done, it's even safer than a house that's never had a sinkhole. I honestly don't know if that's true. I mean, I don't know that it's not, but what can happen to those houses, even after they seem to be fixed up, is maybe the sinkhole wasn't completely filled and it forms, and people try fixing it, like filling it in or plugging it up, and they may think everything's all good again, but sometimes even after it's been fixed, the sinkhole can come back to life, so to speak. So yeah, it's not a sure thing. It's not a sure thing. And just like how a collapsed sinkhole can cause collapsing and getting bigger over time, a sinkhole that's been fixed up with a remediation might suddenly start acting up again, sometimes even several years in the future. So now, why does that happen? Well, there's a few different possible reasons. One is that when the sinkhole was filled, maybe it wasn't completely filled, so there was still some empty space down there, and then over time, you're going to have those gaps again. Another reason could be that the stuff that fell into the hole in the first place, like possibly a portion of the driveway or something, it gets moved around because there's water flowing underground, and that can actually create more gaps and more holes. And sometimes it's a mix of both of those things that's happening. So it could be a lot of things. So even though it might seem like the problem's been solved, sinkholes can be sneaky and they can come back when you least expect it. So, it's kind of a good reminder that when it comes to dealing with sinkholes, it's really, really important to keep an eye out for any signs of trouble or issues, even after they've been fixed up. You don't want to know that you're on firm ground and firm solid ground when you might not really be. So, all right, so what can cause a sinkhole to form? Well, again, two main things that can naturally trigger a sinkhole, which is drought and heavy rainfall, especially when it's drought quickly followed by heavy rainfall. So let's talk about the drought. When there's not enough rain for a long time, the groundwater levels in the underground aquifers can drop. Well, that's going to cause some issue with pressure. Usually the water in these aquifers helps support the ceilings of any gaps or holes in the ground, but when the levels of those water go down, that support disappears, and then the ceilings can't stay held up anymore, so they collapse, and that can form a sinkhole on the surface. There's also this thing called shrink swell clays in the soil that can shrink a lot during a drought. So I don't know if you've ever done much with clay, but it definitely changes things, especially size, once you add or remove water from it. So anyway, so all of that can contribute to a sinkhole formation, but it's not as big a deal as the drop in the groundwater levels. That's a big one. So, all right, now on to heavy rainfall. That's the one I definitely have seen issues with. When there's a huge, big downpour, we're talking over a couple of days especially, it can cause sinkholes in a few different ways. First off, all that extra water adds weight to the soil and the rocks, and it's on top of any gaps or holes in the ground. And that extra weight can sometimes cause the ceiling of the hole to collapse. Also, when it rains a lot, water can collect in low areas and seep into the ground, and there's weight to that water. And if there's a hole down there, the weight of the water and the very fast infiltration of all of that water coming in can cause the ceiling to cave in. And then another way, when there's been a lot of rain over a long time and the ground is already completely saturated, the soil can get soft and it can get weak. So when heavy rainfall hits, it can weaken the ground even more, leading to sinkholes. So whether it's too dry or too wet, the ground can sometimes, give us a surprise with a sinkhole. It is definitely a reminder of how powerful and how changing this natural world around us can be. So, fun. So, okay, but those are the things that can trigger a sinkhole naturally. So what else can do it? Well, we humans do sometimes lead, we can do things that lead to sinkholes forming. We're constantly changing the world around us, right? We do. We change things constantly. So sometimes those changes can affect the ground beneath us, and not always in a good way. One big thing we can do that can cause sinkholes is, of course, pumping out the groundwater, or aggressively pumping out the groundwater, I should say. Of course, we need water to live. Of course, we need to have clean drinking water and all of that. So we pump a lot of it out of the ground every day. In fact, in Florida, more than 4 billion gallons are pumped out. So, but when we take too much water out, it can lower the water levels in the underground. So even if we're not going through a drought, it basically has the same effect. So this can make that ground above those aquifers weaken and sometimes even cause sinkholes to form. There's an example of places like over in Tampa and Plant City where they pump a lot of water for farming or for bottling. And there have been cases where aggressive pumping have actually triggered sinkholes, like as they're actually pumping the water out. Another way that we can kind of mess with the ground is by changing the landscape. Like when we dig up a whole bunch of earth for like mining or maybe building things like roads and buildings. Sometimes by removing too many layers of soil or rock, it can expose the underlying rocks, which can be prone to forming sinkholes. So when we change how water flows on the surface, like with stormwater management, which is a wonderful thing, but not necessarily also great for sinkhole issues, it can sometimes lead to water seeping into the ground in areas that are already going to have problems, and it can actually cause sinkholes. And of course, let's not forget about all the stuff that we bury underground, like pipes and wells and all of that stuff. And sometimes those pipes leak or break, and they can actually create pathways for water to flow underground, and that can lead to sinkholes forming as well. So there have been cases where sinkholes have actually formed under those drill rigs while the wells are being drilled. Some very interesting pictures. You can see them online. So while we might not always realize that, our actions up here on the surface can have a huge impact on the ground beneath us, it's a good reminder to be mindful and to try and take steps to minimize our impact whenever possible. I know that's not always possible, but we can at least try. So what's actually being done? Well, that cool tool I told you about, the W/E model that was used to figure out where the sinkholes might be more likely to form in Florida, well, it's kind of a special map, and that is now helping us to understand which areas of the state have the right conditions for sinkholes to pop up. So the one caveat to that I would mention is this model it's not in the predictive phase exactly and precisely where sinkholes will happen. It's a general idea, okay? At least it's not there yet anyway. Instead, it just kind of helps us pinpoint areas that have the right geological phenomena for, lots of sinkholes to form, especially during those big events like heavy rainfall from tropical storms or hurricanes and stuff like that. And it's also after, of course, a long dry spell when there's like sudden changes in water levels underground or due to aggressive pumping activities, like I said, mentioned down in the Tampa area. But the cool thing about the model is that it's based on a type of statistic called Bayesian statistics, which it takes a lot of the guesswork out of the process. So they actually came up with this scientific way of doing it. And it also helps to make sure that the results are reliable and accurate, and it's actually proving to be so. So this model does seem to work, and scientists, in order to do it, they had to crunch a lot of data. We're talking like terabytes of information, like a lot of information was put into it to get information out. It's also important to remember that the data isn't perfect. They're trying, they're doing the best they can, but it is not perfect. There might be some gaps and some errors here and there. Plus the map they came up with is, again, it's kind of a snapshot in time. So as new data comes in, they're going to need to update the map to keep it accurate. Because again, as we play with the top and the surface of the ground, it's going to change the underground as well. All right, so basically it's split into least favorable, favorable, more favorable, and most favorable for sinkholes. I don't really think that I would like to use the word favorable for sinkholes. I don't think they're favorable, but that it is what it is. Anyway, so that's what the folks over at the Division of Emergency Management are doing, because it kind of gives them a heads up on where they might need to focus their efforts in order to prepare or for preparation for a sinkhole events in the future. All right, now here's the thing. This map is really useful, but it's not meant to tell us exactly where each sinkhole will appear. Okay, so it's not like you can zoom in super well on individual specific parcels or something. It's more about getting a general idea of which parts of the state might be more at risk. Okay, I cannot reiterate that enough. Do not say, is it on the map? Is this particular address? That's not what it's for. It's just a very nifty tool to get a better understanding of where sinkholes might pop up in Florida, and that helps us stay prepared for whatever's thrown our way. Okay. They are already working on some really cool ideas for improvements that could help us get a much clearer picture. I don't know if it's going to be down to the street address, but at least a clearer picture of what's going on underground. That includes working on refining the data that was used to create the maps in the first place. And again, it was a lot of information to go through. It will probably take decades to get through all of it accurately. And they might need to get more information as they're going through that data, because again, we have changes. But yeah, they could also add more data from across the whole state. All right, so info about the rocks, the soil, all of that below the surface, that is something that they're wanting to do. One super helpful thing would be to have what's called seamless statewide LIDAR. And I know that sounds like really fancy and super high tech, but basically it's this type of technology that uses lasers to create really detailed maps of the ground, like very laser focused kind of detailed maps. So having that kind of mapping would be a game changer. It would be extremely accurate. And it would make it much easier to spot areas where sinkholes might form. And get this, if the government could get LIDAR data for several years in a row, they could then track changes over time. And that means we could actually see if certain areas are getting even more prone to sinkholes, or if there are other geological things happening underground. So amazing. But again, to do a laser on the entire state, that's going to take some time and effort right there. Another idea they have is to focus on each county individually, because different counties have different things going on underground. And so by studying them separately, we can get a better understanding of what's happening at a local level. And that would be fantastic. This would really help the planning and zoning department and the government as a whole to figure out what areas would be a great place to put a road or a parking lot or a retention pond in what, while they're developing the certain areas. So I think that would be helpful. Hopefully soon we can even get better at predicting and understanding the sinkholes, and it means that our communities are going to be safer in the long run. So we're getting there. We're ahead by leaps and bounds just from the beginning of this study alone. It's all about using those technology and the data that we get from that to stay ahead of the game. But I know all of this is kind of a bird's eye view from like 1,000 feet up in the air. It's not really what you were thinking of when we said we were going to talk about sinkholes, but you probably want to know more what you can do personally when you are either buying your next home in Florida, or if you're already living in Florida, you already have your home. What can you personally do? Well, first off, you can easily check the county property appraiser's website and see if any of the homes in the vicinity of you or the one you're interested in have reported or even previously repaired sinkholes. So if there was ever an insurance claim or a permit pulled, it's public record. And no, it cannot be removed. It's on there. So if you're worried about sinkholes that much, or if you just want, some kind of peace of mind or assurance, you can get also a sinkhole inspection. Basically, a company like GER.Tech here in Ocala, they can actually go out and they can test the soil and can even use, I believe they use ground penetrating radar to see if your potential home is on solid ground. I believe they have to do that for developments and for corporations coming in, but GER.Tech would be the ones to ask about all that stuff. Another thing you're going to want to do is to check the grading of the home. If the ground is higher where the house is, that means if there's heavy rainfall, the water is going to run away from the home, and you're going to have less of a chance of accumulating water or rain near the foundation and causing issues in the ground below the foundation. Now, what if you already live here and you're here in Ocala and now I have freaked you right out? You are just completely over this now, going, what in the world? All right, basically, it's okay. It's the same advice. You're going to keep the water away from your house. I know it's common not to have a gutter system on your home. It's probably, 1 out of 4 houses have them here, but maybe go ahead and look into doing something like that. Taking all that heavy rainfall away from your house with an excellent gutter system can do wonders for maintaining your foundation, just wonders for the house as a whole. So if you start to see some signs of a sinkhole or a ground depression, go ahead and get an inspection on it. Don't wait. You definitely going to want to take some steps to get the water away from your home now and find out if your property may have an issue before a very small issue becomes a much larger, kind of scary issue. All right, I'm not sharing all of this to scare you. I want you to know that I am here to entertain and to educate and to chit-chat because I am your neighbor. I am out here too, and I am honestly not alarmed by the idea of sinkholes. I know it sounds weird because I've seen them, but it's kind of like when somebody first moves to Florida and they are so freaked out by the alligators. And then after a few years, they're like, oh. I mean, they look scary, but the chances of you actually being attacked by an alligator, they're pretty slim, You know what areas to avoid, when to avoid them. And truthfully, unless you're doing something really crazy, like, chasing the alligator or feeding the alligator or trying to ride the alligator. Yes, we've all seen stuff like this, especially on the TikTok and the YouTube and this stuff. Anyway, you're much more likely to die from a bee sting than an alligator, honestly. Actually, the statistics still count those crazy people. So even if you are doing all of those crazy things, you're still more likely to die from a bee sting or a car accident in Florida than all of the gators and all of the sinkholes combined, okay? This is not something that is that scary, okay? It's not common. All right, I mean, seriously, I've looked it up. I've looked at the statistics. So where on earth did I get all of this information? Today's show, trust me, I am not that smart. I read a few government reports, namely the Florida Geological Survey, which was written by the Florida Department of Environmental Protection, which I would be happy to share with you if you want to read through it. I definitely had a hard time staying awake for some of it, but you're more than welcome to it. Make sure what I'm saying is accurate. You can go ahead and send me an email at GER.ExpectMore@gmail.com, and I would be happy to speak to you about this or give you any phone numbers or references or on this or actually any of my shows. And, I'll forward whatever info I've used. But
Shake it up, stop when the clock hits 13. Sing 1, 2, 3, 4. Cause no one can do it like we do it, like we do it, like we do it. Cause no one can do it like we do it, like we do it, like we do it. Cause no one can do it like we do it, like we do it, like we do it. Cause no one can do it like we do it, like we do it, like we do it.